When Reverend Sam told me that we would be doing an exorcism this month, the first thing I thought of was my interest in what we might call true crime. Whenever I'm trying to relax, I like to put on a true crime podcast or a documentary. And it's not so much that I like knowing about crime as that it flexes a muscle somewhere in my brain, forcing me to wonder why it is that people do bad things to one another, or that bad things exist in our worlds. And this is much the way I'm approaching our time together this morning. I'm going to try to move us slowly toward the why. This morning we're talking about hate, and of all the topics we've covered this month, from anger to fear to indifference, this one has felt for me like the hardest to reckon with, as it's so ever present in our society right now. Hate is at the same time more overt and more underground than I have seen it in my lifetime. All around us, we are watching people lose relationships to whatever name we give the divisiveness that is floating in the air between us. And this topic could be many sermons in itself, so I'll try to hit on some of the things that feel most relevant to us right now this morning. We as Unitarian Universalists, or really even as believers in liberal religion, have often seen ourselves as working to combat hate in the world around us. We've often seen ourselves as being on the side of love. And I think that's all true, even as we know we do it imperfectly. But more and more lately, the idea of working against hate feels harder and harder to do. In this age of violent insurrection and conspiracy theories peddled through social media, I have found myself wondering a lot lately, where do we go from here? And I know too, from listening to many of you, that there's a sadness and a wondering about the level of division in this country. It can feel almost like we're speaking different languages, and this level of confusion and frustration, if those are really even the right words to describe it, it can be hard to bear. So I think we need to start by working with the why part of our minds. We humans are observant creatures. We can see it in our children from an early age. Part of our human development is to be able to notice differences in the people around us. We start off noticing the physical and then the behavioral. It starts early, and it stems from our human desire to understand one another, to be curious about the world around us. I'm a child of the 90s, and when I was growing up, they were still teaching us to ignore differences. They taught us not to see color. And I think we all know now how harmful some of these teachings were, especially now that we're adults trying to grapple with racial justice in America. I don't want to reopen a wound that may just be beginning to heal, and yet I keep thinking about scenes from the Capitol earlier this month, and the fact that liberal churches all over the country were closed last week, over credible threats of white supremacist violence. We began this year watching white supremacists storm the Capitol, and symbols and ideologies that I thought were long behind us were on full display. Somehow it felt different, like the culmination of all the hatred that has been bubbling up for years finally spilling over. When I saw the news, I had just finished recording my pieces for worship that Sunday, and I instinctively did what I've been doing for the past year or so when things just get to be too much. I washed my face, took off all my makeup, put on a sweatshirt and sweatpants, and just got in bed, crawled under the covers with my iPad and my cats. And I watched some news, but I also started reaching out, texting my people, my husband, my family, my friends, just checking in, connection. It truly was enough to kind of knock me down, both physically and emotionally. I'm a millennial, and I've come of age watching bad things happen in our country, enough that not a lot surprises me, but this did. Frederick Buechner in the reading we heard earlier this morning reminds us that hate is something that can easily consume us, that we can lose ourselves in. And I know that this year it has sometimes felt like we were drowning amid a torrent of bad news. And even for the past 4 years, it has felt so frustrating the way injustice after injustice kept piling on. It has taken so much of our collective energy. I think Buechner is trying to tell us how important it is to try not to internalize all of that hate that floats around us, to try not to let it put a pit in our stomach or to drag us down. We are allowed to feel joy, even against the odds. I found a similar idea in a story shared with me this week that comes from the Cherokee people. It is a story of 2 wolves, and in the story, a grandfather is telling his grandson about a battle going on between 2 wolves who live inside of him. One wolf is evil. He is hatred, anger, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego. The other wolf is good. He is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. And the grandfather reminds his grandson that the same fight between 2 wolves is going on inside you and inside every single person you meet. The grandson wonders aloud to his grandfather, which wolf will win the fight? And his grandfather replies easily, the one you feed. Both Buechner and the story of the wolves offer helpful perspectives, but I don't think I can tell you this morning not to hate. I'm not really sure that it's within our control or that it works that way. Second, if I had a soapbox, it would be this. Our emotions, including hate, give us information about things that we value. And our values tell us who we are. So shutting down emotions, that's not helpful. There's always information there beneath the surface. Sometimes hatred might be information that we value justice. I think too that it's okay to hate systems and institutions, but I try to draw my own personal line at hating people. One of the commandments in the Bible that comes up again and again and again is to love our neighbor as ourselves. And yet, it is so much easier said than done, especially when our neighbors believe differently or do things that we don't like. It is lifelong work, and it is painful, and it is not easy. But I think the important thing is that we keep going. There's also a somewhat related idea in Rabbinic Judaism of Yetzer HaTov and Yetzer Hara, or the good inclination and the evil inclination. One pulls us upwards and the other pulls us down. And the evil inclination is associated with our physical appetites, aggressive emotions, ambition. But what's interesting about this idea is that these things on the surface aren't evil at all. We actually need them in order to survive. But the belief in Judaism is that all these things have a tendency toward evil if left unbalanced. The idea is that what makes a very good life is the struggle back and forth between the 2 inclinations, the struggle that lasts a lifetime. And while I don't necessarily agree that human beings have a natural tendency towards evil, I do think that we have a natural tendency towards mistakes. We have a natural tendency to get things wrong. We tend not to give others the same grace we would expect from them. And that's where our belief in covenant as Unitarian Universalists comes in so strongly. The idea that we can work to come back into relationship when we make a mistake, that all is not lost. We have the ability to try again. While we can find ways to understand hate in the world around us and in the beliefs of others, calls for unity can still fall flat for many of us. And I think trying to gloss over just how much damage has been done to relationships for a long time is a mistake. And though we might be excited too about a peaceful transition of power, I would remind us again that the problems we face didn't magically arrive with Donald Trump, and they haven't gone away with him either. The biggest challenges in our country today are systemic and deep-seated, and will take lifetimes to change. And as much as calls for unity might feel like the answer, it's much more complicated than that. In the words of Lutheran pastor Emmy Kegler, unity without accountability is just perpetuated abuse. However, Reverend Sam rightly reminded me the other day when I was struggling with calls to listen to the other side that listening can mean a lot of different things. And it certainly doesn't mean that we always have to agree. In the words of Lutheran pastor Natalia Turfa, burned bridges is not accountability. We hold all the tension of this complicated landscape within us. I believe that healing in our country starts with meeting people's material needs, regardless of their beliefs. To me, this is a manifestation of my Unitarian Universalist values and a belief in the inherent worth and dignity of all people. Even people whose beliefs I might hate with all of my being. We are all worthy, and our worth isn't something that we have to prove to one another. Angela Davis, in her writing on prison abolition, speaks to this notion of addressing our material needs, and most of all, of flexing our why muscle, sometimes in ways that are painful. She writes, "We internalize this notion of a place to put bad people. That's precisely one of the reasons why we have to imagine the abolitionist movement as addressing those ideological and psychic issues, not just the process of removing the material institutions or facilities. Why is this person bad? The prison forecloses discussion about that. What is the nature of that badness? What did the person do? Why did they do that? If we're thinking about someone who's committed acts of violence, why is that kind of violence possible?" I tend to take the broad view and consider our work together this morning as that of a spiritual clearing out of all the pain and sadness and anger and frustration that has been building up in all of us for a while now. Rituals are key in difficult times like these because they help our brains to mark time, to track change, and most of all, to keep going. I heard someone say last month they were going to make sure that they did something special for New Year's Eve, even though they were just going to sit on their couch, because it's so important to mark these passages of time and to engage in some of our normal rituals in new ways. We are called to move forward as people of faith in this world, to continue the work of living. Little rituals are what move us through our days, and they are some of the things that have helped us to keep going over the past year, both physically and emotionally. Peter Gadke reminded those of us who were at the Wednesday night shindig on hospitality that miracles can happen, they often don't. I don't think we need to be in the business of trying to change people's minds or having Facebook arguments or trying to force people to see reason. We can't expect people to change their minds. We can't expect miracles all the time because we would set ourselves up for constant disappointment. What we can do, if we have the energy, is to flex our why muscle. We can remain curious. We can engage in some conversation if we genuinely want to. For those we love who might be lost to conspiracy theories, instead of trying to disprove their beliefs, we can keep the lines of communication open. We can show love and we can show care without agreeing. Of course, each of us need to navigate our own boundaries around this. We do what we can, and we can try not to let hate consume us. At the end of the day, as Reverend Erica Hewitt reminded us in the reading, we are Unitarian Universalists. And we know who we are, and we know who we serve. We serve the Spirit by whatever name we know it. We serve the church community and the community in which we live. We serve one another. We serve the worlds. We serve a spirit of justice that keeps moving us forward. We are imperfect people who have made a commitment to one another not to let that imperfection keep us from action or keep us isolated. We are people who refuse to let our spirits be dampened by hatred, but rather who live in love. May it be so. Amen.